Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to the first UNH Sustainability Alumni webinar of the new academic year. I'm Fiona Wilson and I have the honor of serving as UNH's Deputy Chief Sustainability Officer and as Director of our Sustainability Institute. I'm excited for today's conversation with three incredible UNH alums who I will introduce momentarily. Co-hosting with me today is my colleague, Alexis Dwyer, Alumni and Network Stewardship Coordinator here at the Institute. And you'll hear more from Alexis at the end of today's webinar. Next slide, Alexis, please. We're really pleased to partner with UNH Alumni Relations to bring you this year-long Alumni Sustainability webinar series. We're bringing it to you, our alumni community, because we know that we have hundreds of alumni from across the decades who are working in sustainability-related fields and who have deep expertise and really valuable perspective on these important topics. And then we also know there are thousands more alumni who don't perhaps work in the field of sustainability, but who are interested in this field. And so we've designed these webinars to really allow you to hear from UNH alumni who are leading experts across industries and sectors. And today, as in each webinar, these alums will be sharing some diverse perspectives on the key trends, and you'll hopefully gain some practical knowledge that you can use both personally and professionally. Next slide, Alexis. So we think that UNH is a very fitting host for this webinar series. We started it last year in honor of our 25th anniversary of the establishment of the UNH Sustainability Institute. We were one of the first universities in the country back in 1997 to establish a comprehensive university-wide approach to sustainability. And it's really because of this long-standing commitment that UNH is today one of the leaders in the country. I'll share more about that in a second. But here's just a glimpse of last year's webinar series, and just a huge thanks to all of the fantastic alumni who joined us to speak on this range of topics. Next slide, Alexis. And just as a sort of evidence of this sort of growing alumni network at UNH around sustainability, we started a LinkedIn group specifically for alums who affiliate with sustainability. And we now have close to 600 members and growing. And Alexis will share more at the end of today about how you can join that group if you're not already a member. So I mentioned that we are a national leader in sustainability. We were only the third university in the world to achieve a platinum rating in something called STARS. STARS is the Sustainability Tracking Rating and Assessment System. It's a program of the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education. And it really allows us to, in a very rigorous way, assess and report all aspects of how sustainability is incorporated across the university's curriculum, operations, research, and also community engagement. And within this impressive group, we're still proud to have the 6th highest score in the world. Next slide, Alexis. So I just thought, just before we jump into our webinar, I'll just share a couple of quick updates. I think our last webinar was back in June, so almost 6 months ago. And we've done some fun and interesting things, I think, at UNH since then. Just a couple of brief highlights. We had a wonderful pollinator garden pilot project across campus this summer, and we'll very soon be filing to become a certified bee campus. We also, our colleagues in UNH Energy have been working on a really interesting new thermal storage tank. It's under construction right now. And it's essentially, this is going to be a thermal battery, which will reduce our carbon emissions, improve public health, and also, importantly, save the university money. So we're excited to see that come online soon. Next slide, Alexis. Just more on some of our other programs. Many of you know Trash to Treasure was started way back now over 10 years ago. But it's really cool, and it's a key part of how we are trying to achieve zero waste at UNH. It was student started, it's still student powered. And fun fact, 2023 was our largest full move-in sale in the 11-year history. We saw over a 50% increase in sales. So this idea that the reuse culture is really growing momentum here at UNH. We also launched the Cat Tracks bike share program this past year, and this fall was no exception. We've seen really a nice uptick this fall in the number of riders, and look forward to continuing to grow that. Next slide. And then last but not least, our Summer Sustainability Fellowship. This is a really important program. It's one of our flagship programs here at the university. It allows us to match really passionate, talented students with community organizations, businesses, nonprofits, municipalities across the region and beyond. And this was our largest single cohort ever. We had 40 fellows this past summer, placed at 38 host organizations. So really one of the ways that we're really embodying sustainability, not only in our education programs, but part of how we're really leaning into the public university mission of UNH and supporting community partners in their own sustainability efforts. All right, so we're going to start the webinar. We will have plenty of time for Q&A towards the second half of the hour today. You're welcome to put your questions in the chat at any time during the webinar. We'll get those in queue and get to them as soon as we go to Q&A. But really, it's my pleasure to introduce our three speakers today. Spanning all kinds of fields and sectors, come graduates from across the decades. So really excited that we're joined today by Kathy Saunders, class of 83, Ryan McPherson, class of 96, and Ted Legoo, class of 2011. And so what I've asked the speakers to do, first of all, is just to give us a very brief introduction so that you can hear from them about who they are and their UNH connection and the role they're playing at their organizations today. So Kathy, we're going to start with you.
Sure. Well, good afternoon, everyone. And Fiona, thank you so much, first of all, for your leadership and also just giving us a platform to further tell this story. In fact, I was on a couple of these earlier and just seeing that collage of pictures and the number of people across the country who are involved in this work. I think it says an awful lot about what UNH is doing and doing under your leadership. So thank you so much for giving us a platform to have this conversation. And my hope is it will be the beginning of many more, that's for sure. But I am head of corporate sustainability and public policy for Putnam Investments. It's a firm that I've been at for 37 years. Most of my career I spent in distribution on the retail side of our business, on the institutional side of our business, in our RIA channel, and also in our client experience and early career programs. And for the students who are listening in on this conversation, I guess you could call it a 37-year rotational program that just took me a little bit of time to get through. But I was class of 1983, as Fiona had just mentioned, and majored in communications, minored in English. And both of those things have nothing to do with corporate sustainability. So I know we're going to talk a little bit about that as we get further into the conversation, but thanks again.
I think the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts may disagree with you on that point. I think they have a lot to do with sustainability. Yeah, thanks so much, Kathy. It's wonderful to have you with us. Ryan, over to you.
Great. I'm going to reinforce Kathy's commending of all the work you've done, Fiona and Tom and the team there. It's such a privilege to be with you all and Kathy and Ted. So really looking forward to this. And also just a huge shout out. Stars Platinum is like the holy grail. We are striving towards that here at the University of Buffalo, but UNH has just done some phenomenal work to get there. It is a great achievement, and you all should be commended on that. Like Kathy, I was not a sustainability scholar, if you will. I'm a class of 96 grad. And for those who are doing the math, that's 1 year before the Institute was founded. I don't know if they wanted to wait until I was gone to create that or not, but we'll let that one go. It's been, Durham has a special place in my heart. I met my wife there and some lifelong friends, as I'm sure many of you have had similar experiences. But in the last year and a half, my daughter is now a sophomore at the university, and it is crazy to be back on campus and to see all those things, to see the trash to treasure. What a phenomenal effort, and just the culture. You really can understand why the Institute has had the foundation of success because of all of that culture and all of that change. I am the Chief Sustainability Officer here at the University at Buffalo. I took a rather circuitous path to get to that. I was a poli-sci major at UNH, and went down to DC to work on democracy issues, and then went to law school up in Buffalo, and never left the university. I ended up running our government community relations office here. And then in 2011, 2012, I moved into this role. And it's been just an amazing journey in this field. I love this space. And I'm looking forward to having this conversation. Thanks.
Thanks, Ryan. It's wonderful to have you and all of your family connected back with UNH, including your wonderful daughter. Ted, over to you.
Oh, thank you for having me. Yeah, I just echo Ryan and Kathy's sentiment. It's a privilege to be here, and just watching these first few minutes of the presentation, just the amount of achievement UNH has had, even since I've been there, and the programs that have been put into place, such as Trash to Treasure. Like, I would love to have had that back then, but just a pretty amazing place. And I think, as all of us probably share here, is there's just this very fond memories of UNH and Durham in general, time spent there. And it's funny hearing Ryan mention it. I too met my wife at UNH and have many still very close friends that I met there. So I had a wonderful time in my 4 years there. I graduated in the class of 2011, Bachelor of Science in Economics, so also non-related directly to sustainability. After 4 years at Durham, moved down to Boston for about a decade, where I worked at Liberty Mutual and strategy, innovation, and risk roles, before leaving to actually found an environmental startup that I later sold and joined Merchants Fleet, where I am the director of ESG. So I oversee environmental, social governance initiatives for the company, and largely focusing on the culture side and building the mindsets and culture within the organization to successfully do good at scale and ultimately help the company develop long-term value. So that's my background.
Great, Ted. So wonderful to have you with us as well. So we've designed today's conversation. We're going to have a little bit of a sort of a lightning round to begin with, and so we've got three different sort of lightning round questions here. So the first one is, and I've asked this panelists to say just like 30 or 40 seconds each on this, but just to sort of ground us in, what do we even mean by sustainability? As my colleague and friend and the founding executive director of the Institute, Tom Kelly, says, sustainability is a big idea, a very big idea. And so it can often be hard to define that. But the question that I wanted to pose to you all is, what does a sustainable future mean to each of you? Kathy.
Sure. And we had a great conversation when we were preparing for this call around this, and not to get too heavy too quickly in this conversation, but to get away from the label, to make sure that this work is so ingrained in the fabric of what we do that it doesn't need a call out. And I don't mean to be too theoretical around it, because behind that is a bunch of work that has to take place. And I know we're going to be discussing that on this call. But I think just making sure that we're doing everything that we possibly can to remove any label and make sure that it is mainstream as we possibly can get. And not just using this as a platform to talk about compliance or reducing anything, because I think a lot of times when we talk about sustainability, our minds go completely to the climate aspect of things. But there is the E, there is the S, and there is the G, and to have a balanced mosaic of all of those things as we approach the work that needs to be done in this arena.
Thanks, Kathy. Ryan.
Yeah, that's great, Kathy. I think it's I kind of joke, it's like, what do we want to be when we grow up, right? And as Ban Ki-moon kind of says about the Sustainable Development Goals, which I think really do a really nice job of kind of illustrating what sustainability is. It's our to-do list, right? It's our to-do list for our people and our planet. And I think thinking about really for me, the Haudenosaunee here in New York, 6 nation states, the great law of the Haudenosaunee and the Iroquois Confederacy, and thinking about 7 generations, right? About how we make decisions, smart, long-term strategic decision-making is what sustainability to me at its core is really about, and founded not just on the life support systems, planetary pieces, but also about people, and how do we leverage all of that intellectual human capital these problems are big and they need all of us. And then how do we really think about how do we pencil all that stuff out? We live in the real world, right? How do we make that work economically as well?
Beautiful. Thank you, Ryan. And Ted, what does
Oh,
a sustainable future
those
mean to you?
responses. Yeah,
Ditto.
I'd echo what Ryan and Kathy said, but in addition to that, I'd say from a business perspective, I really think of sustainability as being businesses realizing the opportunity to do well financially by doing good for our planet, people, so employees and communities alike. And that's the most like stripped down version I can really say it is businesses realizing the opportunity to do well by doing good and not seeing it as a this or that, but really a this and that, and allowing the two to complement one another.
And when that thought becomes more mainstream, then we have a sustainable future. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, you're all immersed in this work, you know, like me and my colleagues, more than most, and you probably read and listen to most on this topic. Certainly a lot has happened in the world in the last 6 months since we had last had our last webinar. And you know, and we think context really matters, right? You know, we have become big advocates here at the Institute of really kind of uplifting the context in the world around us so that everybody, all our stakeholders, really understand kind of the urgency and the complexity of the work that we're doing and why it matters. So we'd love just to do a sort of another lightning round to sort of really set the context. So I'm going to ask each of you to say, you know, what is one piece of kind of bad or not so great news or a development from the last 6 months that you really think people listening today should be aware of and really paying attention to? And at the same time, you know, we do have some signs of progress. So what's one development or piece of news from the last 6 months that gives you hope and should give us all hope? Why don't I start with Ryan on this one?
Sure, great. Thanks. Thanks for the Debbie Downer leadoff question, Fiona. Yeah, you know, there is a lot of bad news, to be totally honest, out there. I think the one for me is kind of under the Captain Obvious label, which is, you know, this summer, right? Waking up to the smell of wildfires in upstate New York, and I'm sure New England as well. Or seeing the horrific floods in Montpelier and throughout Vermont, and the vertical streaming of water that New Hampshire has seen. We are running out of time. This is not something that is happening in the future. It is happening now, and we have a very discrete window by which we can minimize the effects. And so I think on the negative side, it's here, and we're not, you know, we don't need to wait for more proof on this. I think on the positive side, I just, you know, working where I work, I get to see millennials and Zs and the way in which they are leading and looking at the world. You know, 72% of them think that how sustainable a university is a major factor in deciding where to go to school. And a stat this summer, which was crazy to me, realizing that in 2 years, by 2025, 75% of the workforce will be millennials and Zs, and the way in which they are being recruited to companies. And, you know, one of the main things on their mind is, what is that company doing? What are they, not just what are their words, but what actions are they taking? I'm sure Kathy sees this quite a bit on her side of the ledger. And that gives me really great hope in terms of the direction and the actions that we see playing out.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. Ted, why don't we go to you next?
Yeah, there's a lot of not so great news, especially this past year. And similar to Ryan, I kind of wrap this up into one big thing, but in two pieces. Is one, just this unfortunate headlines that we've seen this past year of ESG versus returns and profitability just being, frankly, incredibly short-sighted and oftentimes a little bit too politically driven. Has definitely been unfortunate that's reared its ugly head again. But in addition to that is just, or in combination of that is really, to Ryan's point, it's just this general feeling of running out of time from an environmental perspective. Like, this past summer, hottest summer on record, 100-degree waters off of Florida. And I was reading an article recently about how there's been 23 cat events, which cat events insurance talk is basically natural disaster events that have been over $1 billion. So it's been like $60 billion worth of damage from natural disasters this past year. So beyond the environmental perspective, the social perspective of these natural disasters is there's this incredible impact from a dollar perspective that is just like, this is going to continue. And it's just one of those things where going back to ESG versus profitability, it's just like, guys, we're running out of time. We need to take action. So that's my not so great news. But on the flip side of that, some of the positive bits or the piece that I'm excited about, which frankly, I probably would have said the same thing this time last year, is the SEC disclosure proposals around emissions, right? So they were supposed to come out late last year, early this year, midway this year, and now the latest I'm hearing is sometime this month, but October, as we know, is fast approaching, moving into November. So I'm hopeful with that, because I think, so for folks on the call who aren't as in tune with this, it's really the Security and Exchange Commission, which Kathy can probably speak to at volume much better than I can, is really putting forth these regulations that would require public organizations to disclose their scope 1, 2, and potentially 3 emissions over the next few years. And what I think this will do, though it's not a sexy solution, is really start making these companies accountable, both from an investor perspective, so making investments, so funneling money to places, but also from a consumer side as well, for those that really want to dig in and say, okay, what is this company? This company is saying this, but what are they actually doing? And I think I think it has the potential, if it goes through as proposed, to have a pretty tremendous impact. And that,
I agree.
That makes me excited.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Kathy, what's your one piece of not so good news, but your more optimistic news?
I could not agree more with what Ryan and Ted just said, just in terms of time running out. We're on the meter, we're on the clock in here. And Ted alluded to it. While all this is happening and while time is running out, there is a ton of noise around this work coming from policymakers, and it is on full display. So we're almost shooting ourselves in the foot a little bit. And there's a movement to rhetoric and a movement away from the work and the substance and the stuff that actually needs to get done for us to make progress. So that's the biggest thing. And that noise is shifting every single day. And it makes it even more incumbent upon us to make sure that we have one eye focused on sort of that North Star and keep the rhetoric away from the progress that we're trying to make. The good news is that whenever something like that happens, there's a huge demand and a knowledge gap to educate people on what this is and what it isn't. And you combine that with what Ryan and Ted just talked about in terms of this generation behind us who want to be attached to something bigger, something that they can come at as a collective and call it purpose and mission. And having that galvanization, if you will, to that purpose and mission in their work and at their workplace as well, that's what they want to be attached to. But if you take a couple of steps back, when anything evolves, you're always going to go through the 3 phases where you've got this enthusiasm around the work, and then the scope broadens a little bit, and then the rhetoric starts happening. And then the phase 3 is always about getting to what's relevant, getting to the substance. And that's the stage that we're at right now as all of these things happen. But I think the more that they do, the more people are noticing it, and the more it's going to be part of the conversation moving forward as more people get engaged and involved. So it's a little bit of a good news, bad news story, but it all can lead to progress if we handle it the right way. The last thing that I would say regarding the engagement that we're getting from the next generation is we had an associate who actually we recruited to come to the firm, and she almost left because she said, you know what, I don't think the financial services business is for me. And she said, would you write me a recommendation to go back and get a degree in social work? So I did it, no problem whatsoever, making sure that we get next gen talent to where they're authentically aligned to something that we pay a lot of attention to. So she applied to and got into all the schools that she applied to. She ended up deciding on Columbia. She came back to us and she said, do you mind if I work while I'm waiting to go to school in the fall? So we said, absolutely. And then we gave her a 3-month project to work on some projects in financial literacy. She got into the work and I got a phone call probably 2 months into the project, and she decided not to go back and get her master's in social work because finally she felt that she was involved in the real purpose and mission of what we're trying to do as a firm, which is to change people's lives in a policy, in a very profound way. And part of that obviously involves their financial future. So at any rate, I digress, but I think there's an interconnectivity of a lot of these inputs that are going to be necessary to get the output that we seek.
Yeah, I love that story, Kathy. Thanks for sharing that. All right, we have one quick sort of more lightning round, and these are just going to be yes, no, or one-word answers. So in aggregate, a couple of questions on this. In aggregate, from a sustainability perspective, do you think that the world is better or worse than a year ago? Ted?
Worse.
Ryan?
Both. I'm a lawyer, so I'm going to argue both sides.
Kathy?
Better.
Wow, that's fun. So next question, can we find models that achieve both economic growth and sustainable consumption? Yes or no? Ryan?
Yes.
Oh, Ted?
Yes.
Ryan?
Absolutely, we are.
Kathy?
Yes.
Good. Next question, is there an inevitable trade-off between sustainable choices and financial strength? Yes or no? Ted, I know what you're going to say already.
No, not if you do it right. No.
No.
Kathy? Ryan? No. Yeah, Kathy?
Short-term, yes. Long-term, no.
Yeah, nice caveat. And then lastly, despite all of the challenges, are you hopeful? Yes or no? Ted?
You betcha.
Ryan?
Nice Sarah Palin reference. Absolutely, yes.
I never thought I'd have that name reference.
Maybe I should have said
everything
Tina
on
Fey.
your-
Sorry, Tina Fey.
Kathy?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, that's great. Well, listen, we want to move into a little bit more of a substantive dialogue, and on that hopefulness, Kathy, I'm going to start with you. Given this global context and the reality that you've all just shared, how are you approaching sustainability within your own organizations? What shifts are you making as an organization, or what are some of the big areas of focus for you in the next sort of 1 to 3 years?
Sure. So when I took on this role, it was about 2 years ago now, and it is a new category. So everybody's sort of building the plane while they fly it. We're included in that without question. But I'm often asked, at Putnam, and we're an asset manager, so we steward assets for our clients on the institutional and retail side of our business. I'm often asked, well, do you view this work as an investment strategy? Do you view it as a category? Or do you view it as a way that you lead the firm? And the answer to that is all of those things. So one of the first things that we had to do was to put together a corporate sustainability report, which is basically an aggregation across the enterprise of everything that we're doing in terms of inputs to drive change in this area. And the framework that we chose to use is sort of under the heading of what matters most. And it was a way for us to provide a framework of accountability so that we could track our progress, but also underneath all of it gave us some agility to evolve as the category evolves, and it does. And I think you need to have a lot of confidence to be able to grow as the category evolves, and we've done that along the way. So with that framework, what we decided on is basically 4 or 5 different pillars that we focus on. At the center is definitely investments, because that's what we do for a living. The culture that we bring to the firm, what our workplace looks like in terms of sustainability, some of the commitments that we're making to the community, and also the ethics and compliance. And that's called that the G, which never gets a lot of attention, but is so much a part of what we do in the asset management and the financial services business. And the prudent man rule came out in 1830, and I guess you could make a case that our work started when Judge Samuel Putnam put forward the prudent man rule. That's when our sustainability work started, because that's a foundational element in terms of the governance that is viewed at the highest levels across our business. So that was the framework. We wanted to be very intentional about it. We wanted to make sure that it had a unified focus, unified language across the organization, so that not only could we do the work, that we could communicate the work as well. What are we doing just in terms of some of the evolution? We have a massive focus on data integrity, data hygiene. The reporting that we have to do for compliance reasons, for client reasons, and so forth is off the charts. So there's a lot of work that we've done there. And the second piece is continuing to socialize the work that's being done. And part of that is just a matter of education and repetition, so that everybody knows what the story is. Where are we going from here in the next 1 to 3 years? Well, the news that we have from Putnam is we were just acquired from Franklin Templeton. So you take the platform that we have right now with $170 billion in assets under management, we're going to be bolting that on to our new firm in Franklin Templeton, which is $1.5 trillion in size, one of the largest asset management firms out there. So a broader set of work that's going to be happening over the combined enterprise, and we're already in discussions in terms of what that roadmap and plan is going to look like. So that's really the framework that we put in place. And again, it gives us a chance to hold ourselves accountable, but also to develop as the category does along the way.
Thank you, Kathy. Really interesting work. And that's a great segue, I think. Ryan, I'd love to ask a question of you that relates to that. So, given the urgency and the complexity of these sort of big sustainability challenges we've been talking about, how are you and how do you think we as a community should really think about scaling up sustainability efforts? How do we get more done faster?
Yeah, I mean, this is the $1 zillion question, right? Like, how do we do this? We can do this in little pilots and micros, but when you think about an issue like climate, that doesn't quite get us to where we need to go. I think globally speaking, I always was I majored in poli-sci at UNH. Government was going to kind of deliver us to a lower emission world future. And I think we've been really challenged on that. In fairness, to get 200 nation states to agree on anything, I can't get 4 people in my household to agree on what we're doing for Netflix this night, right? So I get it. But I think looking at the market and Fiona, you do a lot of work in this space. Being able to leverage the market to scale these types of solutions is the strategy. It is the only strategy that can work as fast as we need to from a global context. I think from a cultural one, the light bulb moment for me here at UB was thinking about, look, we have a community of 40,000 people here on campus. I kind of joke sometimes and say, my job isn't actually to do the sustainability work. The job has to happen amongst 40,000 people. I want faculty, poets who integrate sustainability into their work. And yes, engineers and doctors and physicians and lawyers and all sorts of folks in the humanities, et cetera. My job is to connect people, it's to raise money, it's to storytell. It's not to drop the emissions. That's all of our jobs. And I see that happening in companies as well, right? Like how it isn't just the facilities people's job. It's like, as in Kathy's situation, how do I get those investments decarbonized, right? How do I get the mobility sector to do that? So it's a really comprehensive approach on one sense, but it's integrating it in to everyone's role. It has to be our work collectively, and putting incentive mechanisms that really reinforce that to help us get there. I think that's kind of the way I'm seeing that right now.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And Ted, I know you've also been thinking about that a lot in your role. But maybe I'll sort of pose a sort of slightly different question to you. What keeps you up at night? What are some of the things that you and you think other sustainability leaders in different organizations are really struggling with right now?
Yeah, it's one of those things. The thing that's keeping me up at night isn't so much a struggle, but really just thinking so hard about how to solve this problem. And the word that comes to mind after just hearing Ryan speak is mobilization, right? So mobilizing a large group of people to take action and be able to be accountable of our emissions, our social products, so on and so forth. So what's been a primary focus of mine and what's just been just dead set on is really building the culture and mindsets within our organization so that ESG doesn't just live with my team, my small team, but really the whole company, all 700 employees, right? And how we've done that is we first took a step back and said, okay, ESG, let's explain what ESG is to the company, environmental social governance. You say that and it doesn't get you far. It's like, okay, what the heck does environmental social governance mean? So we said, okay, we need to really think about this problem. And it's very simple to make things difficult. It's difficult to keep them simple. So our goal is to simplify this as much as we can so we can speak to a broad audience and have them be able to effectively interpret this. So for us, ESG, as I alluded to earlier, is doing well by doing good. We fundamentally believe our company will do well in the long term, create long-term value by doing good for our planet, our people, and our communities. By doing that, you start to say, okay, now I can kind of get an idea of where you're coming from with this and why. Again, these are 5 very short words, doing well by doing good. But another piece of that, though, is so crucial to me, and it literally kept me up at night, is how do I address this in a way where we address profit and goodness in a very concise way to basically combat the adversarial conflict that you see in the headlines of ESG hurts returns and it's not in the investee's best choice. So how do you do that? And it's like saying it, showing not saying that they're related, showing the correlation between the two, doing well by doing good. And the piece is that is like, okay, great. That's something you've shared it outright. You've expressed what you meant. People are interpreting it. But then what you really need to do, and this another thing that keeps me up at night, is how do you mobilize those people to follow through on that? And for us, the strategy we've really taken is kind of a subset of doing good. Is to do good, you first need to be good. You need to build those mindsets and cultures. So a very big focus of ours these past 18 months is a high volume of highly visible solutions. So you surround people with what I call goodness and show them what this looks like. So then they can start building that culture and mindset. So then we can effectively do good at scale for our clients. And what's exciting to us is, to me anyways, is there's 3 transformational stages I see with businesses. There's harmonious, complementary, and driving, right? In terms of business innovation and sustainability. You have companies where you're doing sustainability stuff over here, you're doing your business stuff over here harmoniously, they live, they exist. Then you have companies that are a bit more mature where it's complementary. It's like, oh, there's an opportunity here for us to not only do good, but also do well with the business. And then thirdly, where I'm really trying to push us by building this mobilization within our company is having sustainability drive business innovation to not only do good at scale, but to drive our business results. And to me, that's what keeps me up at night, is what are these innovations that we're going to use to disrupt the industry to not only do well as a business, but to do good for our planet, people, and communities. So that's what keeps me up at night.
Yeah, I love that framework, Ted. I'll probably shamelessly borrow that. That's really, really a good way to think about things. I mean, each of you are sort of touching on this, but I think before we go to audience Q&A, and just a reminder, we'd encourage anybody in the audience, you can start putting questions that you have for the speakers in the Q&A function. So last question I think we'll get to now is, on a more personal level, it's sort of interesting to me that, each of you came to your role in sustainability after careers in, in other areas, right? And so as you've made that transition, what have you kind of concluded it takes to be a really effective leader of sustainability today? Kathy, I'll start with you.
Sure. I mean, it's sort of a theme that we've heard from Ryan and Ted already, and that's sort of the ability to adapt. This is a category that a lot of people are feeling forced to make promises without a plan and without a roadmap to actually do the work. And you're getting new information every single day. You need to have the confidence to be able to adapt, and confidence that also requires impatience in order to make progress. So you're balancing those two things all the time, but also a certain level of humility. I mean, an example is the Prime Minister of England is under a little bit of fire right now for walking back some of the work that he wants to do on net zero. And it's easy to say, well, you put out a promise there. What are you doing about it? Now you're walking it back and you're breaking your promise. Why can't we lean into that and let him adapt? He didn't make any change to his line of travel, right? That stays the same, but he's being more realistic around the new information that he's taken in along the way. So the ability to adapt, the ability to be impatient, and also a certain level of humility brought to the work overall.
Kathy, I love those. I just want to build off of that and add maybe one in, which is, I think it's also kind of a relentless approach of focusing on the why for people. I think for us, the why is, well, it's obvious, but there's reasons that sometimes this doesn't resonate with major constituencies, and we're not speaking human lots of times. We are speaking our languages. And coming at it from an approach that doesn't resonate with particular constituencies. And so I think thinking about, for us here at the university, it's not just about the science and the data, but it's also about the business case. It's also about student demand, right? It's also about resilience, all of those things, and thinking about really kernelizing that why as we're communicating and trying to build constituencies and larger coalitions. And the final piece I would add in, this is really hard work. And I think it also takes resilience. I think you have to know that we're in this for the long game, and that resiliency is part of the leadership component that I think one has to have if they're in this space.
Yeah, I so agree with that, Ryan. And we often ask ourselves at UNH, rather than defining what is sustainability, we ask the question of what sustains us. What sustains us as organizations, as communities, as this large community of humans on planet Earth. But we also have to ask that question of ourselves, right? Is how do we sustain ourselves to allow us to keep doing this work, which, as you say, can be hard and grueling and for the long run. Yeah, I love that. Ted, what do you think it takes to be an effective sustainability leader today?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what Ryan and Kathy have already said. I'd say one piece I would add on to that is the ability to influence, right? So to influence, especially at the highest level. So being able to speak the language of CEOs and CFOs. And in my experience, oftentimes that comes down to dollars. So being able to show not just what the cost of a program or initiative is, but the opportunity cost of not doing that program in the long term is how you'll be able to connect with that level of individuals, but also be able to successfully bring these ideas and these initiatives forward so you can take action and that you have support in doing so. So I'd say the ability to influence at those levels is very important.
Yeah, and I suspect, Ryan, you'd agree with me. That's not just something that is relevant in a for-profit, but also in a non-profit context as well. That's some of the work that you and I do every day as well, right?
In a very decentralized environment, yes.
Yeah. Well, we'd love to open it up some time for questions and answers from our audience. There's one question that I can see here that I'd love to pose to you all. As hiring managers, are you seeing new graduates from universities with the needed skill sets and mindsets in sustainability? And if not, sort of what are the gaps?
I'll jump into that. Yes and no. I think yes on the passion, the purpose, the technical skills, like blows me away. What our recent grads are bringing to the table. I think that the piece that where the gap still is I would go back to that aspect of speaking human. All of us want to speak in our own language, and that doesn't help persuade someone or get them to see something that they might not have been ready to see. And so when we think about the classic example, right? Like if you're talking to farmers, you're not talking about a Keeling curve, right? You're talking about the weather and crop and all of those things. And so really doing that work and understanding your audience, I think that's a gap area right now, that empathy of understanding all constituencies, not just the ones that you affiliate with or that resonate there as well. So David Brooks has done some really good writing on this, and I really subscribe to the way of looking at that. So I think it's really about understanding your audience as you go through this.
Kathy or Ted, anything to add on sort of what you're seeing as hiring managers and whether you're seeing those skill sets and mindsets for sustainability in sort of recent graduates?
I couldn't agree more with Ryan, and the only thing that I would add is, the world is increasingly a world of transmission, and I think listening is equally as important if you're going to be not just good but great at this work. And then the second thing is a lot of work needs to get done. And the last roster that I looked at here at Putnam, we had about 50 different people who had come from UNH as part of our organization. And I will tell you, there are 50 people here at this firm who know how to jump in and get stuff done. It's that simple. So they are perfectly aligned with the skill set, if you will, that needs to happen to get more progress in this arena.
Yeah, love that. There's a great question in here from an alum, Daniel Zuby, who actually is going to be part of our next webinar next month. So nice to see you, Daniel. He asks the question for you all: how do you suggest that we tackle the frustrating political divide that is working against meaningful climate action?
Yeah, thanks for that softball. That's an easy one.
Give it to the poli-sci guy.
Exactly.
I don't know the answer. I do think that modeling the behavior is always the number one way that we create change. We always want to try to, get all of us in lecture, but as my kids know, when you tell someone what to do, that's not when change happens, right? It's modeling that in our own companies, in our own lives. That's an incredibly strong signal that sometimes I think we don't give as much credence to. I do think, though, that there is a political strategy on this that a lot of different entities are working with. When you look at the exit polling, when you look at the data, again, those Zs and millennials are voting, particularly in alignment with their values on this issue. And I think putting emphasis into that and making sure that people turn out to voice their beliefs and their motives. We have, I think the one thing we haven't touched on, Fiona, you touched on this on the last webinars, but I mean, the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, is an unbelievable signal. And we have waited so long for federal action. And what we are seeing from companies right now on that, just because it's a tax credit and it's not an appropriation, there's so much more money being spent from that, or will be spent, than what was originally seen. And so that's not a political issue, that's a business decision. And I really think there's going to be an effect on that starts to pull people over to that. but we've got to be telling those stories. We've got to be getting that message out. And you know, I think we will see greater traction to help us with this, but it is frustrating.
Yeah. There's a quick question here from Kate Bashline. Where do you start to communicate with someone believing a mistruth?
I'll give my 2 cents, which is 1, stay calm. Assume good intent. Oftentimes, especially the deeper you get into this stuff and your knowledge grows, the harder it is just to listen ultimately. And I think the more that you can stay calm, and as Kathy had mentioned earlier, truly listen to where they're coming from and how they got that information and their background, you set yourself up to be able to have a conversation. And conversations where there's 2 ways of communication is really where I found you can gain the greatest ground.
Couldn't agree more. It's the conversation, being in the same room. That doesn't mean a conversation over text, over email. You're missing 90% of the message if you do it that way. And that goes for somebody at your company, somebody in your community, you name it. It also includes policymakers to just have a one-on-one educational conversation, hearing what their objections are and overcoming those in person.
Yeah, talking about the importance of having those conversations in person. There's a great comment and question here from one of my faculty colleagues here at UNH, Skip DeVito. You know, he makes the comment that the majority of solar panels, batteries, and critical materials all come from China, where the majority of China's industrial fuel is still coal. But by contrast, not a single LED light is manufactured here in the USA. So his question is, why are these conflict risks and embodied carbon issues such a small part of our sustainability dialogue? Why aren't we talking more about this?
I think that's a great question. I think we're all still trying to figure that out, to be quite honest. It's not easy to count scope 3 emissions and embodied carbon, although I will put a plug in for my alma mater here. The SciMap program and all of the carbon counting that UNH has done, not only for its own university, but is the standard for higher education right now, and probably beyond, Fiona. I don't know. We are making a lot of progress in starting to do that. So, for instance, we're starting to count the carbon in food here at UB, and I know UNH is as well, and others. So, trying to it's hard to make progress on something when you can't measure it, and so it's easy. What emissions? And so I think there's a little bit of that. I do think that the IRA, again, is set up in a way to try to change some of the dynamics of the first part of that question, and to start manufacturing those things here, and then regulating them under under the ways in which we need to in order to reduce emissions. But I think measurement is one of the prime reasons. But we're moving into that space right now much quicker than I thought we would.
Yeah, and thanks for that shout out. It's one of the things that we're really passionate about, helping teach and educate a whole generation of students who have those carbon, nitrogen, greenhouse gas emissions measurement skills, because we agree, if you can't measure it, you can't change it. We're getting close to time, and so I wanted just to ask each of you, just with a closing sentence, or maybe 2, but what is one big takeaway that you really love to leave the audience with today? Kathy, let's start with you.
Sure. I would just say we all have agency. We all have the ability to make a difference. And, just to wrap up where we started with, and I think your number was 600 people who were involved in this work and this consortium and group at UNH. That's a big universe of people. And it's not surprising to me, because if you look at, and I'll go back to the people who we have here at Putnam, the UNH grads are willing, able, and ready to jump in and make a difference. So it's not a surprise to me that you've got 600 people willing to answer the call. And I won't go off on my UNH riff, but that says it all. And everybody has the agency to get involved. That would be the biggest point.
I love that message. Ted?
I'd say this gets a little philosophical, but if you do good things will follow, or they won't. But at least something good will have been done. And if any of you are like me, that will really give you the fuel to do greatness for both the world and business alike. And above all else, allow profit, planet, and people to really complement and ultimately accelerate one another forward. And in my opinion, that's where that combination is, where that combination lives, is where greatness lives. So that's my bit.
Love it. All right, Ryan, you're going to close us out.
Yeah, well, thanks. Thanks for putting me behind Kathy and Ted on this one. That's a hard act to follow. I do think that we are, look, there's going to be some pain and some bumps as we go forward here, but this is about becoming who we are meant to be. This is the work. And we have an amazing opportunity in front of us to achieve the things that we are capable of doing. We've done this many times as messy, silly humans, and we can rise to this occasion. And I think, Jane Goodall's counsel to us when thinking about hope doesn't happen from some Pollyannish, idea of it. It happens when you actually physically enter the arena and do the work. And so many alums are doing that. So many people like Kathy and Ted and you, Fiona, and we're getting there, but we need to double down on this and we need to scale. But we are getting there and we will get there.
Well, look, this has been a fantastic conversation. Such a pleasure to spend time with each of you, hear your wisdom and your insights. I can't think of a better way to kick off this webinar series for this academic year, really, with this sort of state of sustainability. Lots of really great thought-provoking ideas and questions here. So thank you, Kathy, Ryan, Ted. Thanks so much for being with us and for all that you do. You make, you're wonderful role models for all UNH sustainability alumni. So we're so glad you could join us. And I'd love just to hand over for a couple of minutes to my wonderful colleague, Alexis Dwyer. She's the Network and Network and Program Stewardship Coordinator. So she'd love just to share a few things in closing with you. Alexis, over to you.
Hi, thank you, Fiona. Welcome, everyone. It's been, to kick this off, you all did such an incredible job. I'm really excited to see so many of the attendees here today. And of course, to all of our attendees, we would love to stay connected with you. Here on the screen, you can see some different ways to get involved. And if anything piques your interest, please feel free to reach out to me. And especially, I want to highlight hosting a sustainability fellow. And right now, the Sustainability Fellowship RFP is actually open. So if you have any interest about hosting a fellow for the summer of 2024, we'd love to have you apply. And in fact, if you have ideas but want to workshop about your potential idea for an application, reach out to me and I'm happy to set up a meeting to workshop your idea and get the application in time for the November 3rd deadline. And of course, if November 3rd is difficult for you, reach out to me. We'll get you there. We'll get you to the finish line and maybe even a few days after. And of course, we would love for you to attend our other UNHSI events and join our LinkedIn group, which if you just search it on LinkedIn, it's UNH Sustainability Alumni, and we post all of our events there, registrations there, so you can stay in the loop. And I believe my colleague Kathy is going to be chatting in that link to the chat as well. You do have to request to join, but once you request, we'll quickly get you approved. And speaking of events, want to highlight our next one of these alumni webinars, which we hope you'll be joining us for November 15th, the future of the transportation transition. And you can see our guest speakers there on the slide. We're really looking forward to that and having you join us. Thank you so much, Fiona, and thank you to our incredible speakers today.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks
Have
so
a great
much.
day.
Bye.
See you on November the 15th.
Take care.